Let's go ahead and jump in, be respectful of everybody's time. First off, thank you all for joining us today. This is the first of our new Survive and Thrive webinar series. And what we are going to do is provide weekly updates based on everything that is going on, and hopefully provide some very valuable information and some actionable information that you can take away in what is a crazy, fast-paced, ever-changing business landscape right now. My name is Ryan Weissmuller. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the president of Fintrepid Solutions. We're a boutique firm that partners with CEOs and management teams of small and mid-sized businesses, and we've worked with over 75 companies supporting them. So we have a unique perspective of what's going on Main Street, and certainly is what is happening in everyday America, and the impact of what is going on in the economy and what it's done to small businesses. So what we're going to talk through today, and again, the goal is to keep this brief, impactful. So we're going to talk through and address a few things. We should have a good bit of time, hopefully, for Q&A at the end. And certainly I'd encourage you to tune back in, next week as I'll touch on a few things. There will be a number of things that will continue to unfold. For any of you who've heard me give a webinar, any kind of presentation over the last month, and there have been quite a few, I'm still going to say the one key tenet in everything, and that is that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. I think now more than ever, the importance of a customized approach. I had a CEO talk to me the other day about something his neighbor did with his company. That can be very, very dangerous. So again, understanding the right options, the right decisions based on where each individual business is hugely important right now. What we're going to do is talk through just briefly some market updates and what's going on. Continues to be an extremely hot topic, relief options and what's going on with those. So we'll touch on what's out there, what changes have occurred, and then some of the pending changes to keep an eye out for, some best practices, and that's really where it gets to some of that key actionable information that you want to take with you and use going forward, or for those of you working with these clients that businesses out there can use to move the ball forward. And then, as I mentioned, some Q&A. So there is a Q&A box. I would encourage you. I know some questions were submitted in advance, but if you do have some questions, use that Q&A box, and we'll get through as many as we can. So let's dive in quickly just to what is happening out there in the market, and a couple of things. There's big picture and small picture things to bear in mind. I think one thing that is very important to remember in all of this, and it's dangerous sometimes reading the headlines, is just all the volatility that is going on in our world. Whether that be the stock market, over the last few days, even with what's happened with oil prices. There's a lot of these shock and awe headlines that you read. For example, the price of gas, or the price of oil, I should say, went negative for a period of time. Did it actually go negative in a meaningful way? No, it was more of kind of a weird market fluke, but that grabs headlines. So, from one day to the next, there's going to be a lot of movement. There's going to be a lot of change. The key is really to see where trends are changing, what's happening in a bigger picture. But certainly, two things to watch out for will be consumer demand and the demand for oil. Oil is still going to be a big driver. Oil is going to be with us long after COVID-19 is behind us. And then what the consumer does, that is ultimately going to drive and have such a trickle-down effect in our economy. That is going to be very key. The consumer is not buying the same things in the way they were. Yet by the same token, things like online sales, discount sales, have boomed, and certain things are being bought. And it's really a question of as states begin to reopen, and that's something that's happening in a very fluid situation. What is the impact on various goods, services that consumers are purchasing, and what is the availability to even purchase those services? It will be state by state in terms of which businesses are allowed to reopen and when. And that will be something very, very key to watch. I think another key trend that we've seen, certainly from our customers, from other companies we've talked to, and then just all the other key constituents in and around the marketplace, is there's been this dichotomy of an acute versus a delayed impact for some businesses. So there are companies out there that were hit head on March 20th, and really felt very dramatic impact from some of the changes, the stay-at-home orders, et cetera. There are other businesses that, for example, just now are starting to see some of that impact. So maybe, maybe the sales volume is still there, but starting to see AR get stretched out. Or for companies with longer lead cycles where, orders were in place, and it's only now that the impact of a dwindling pipeline is starting to have an effect. So whether that's your business, a business you're around, or again, a customer or supplier, something just key to understand and what that impact is. The Fed, Treasury, Congress continue to be extremely aggressive. There are more and more programs being thrown out. We'll talk about some of those in a little bit more detail, but it is very clear at this point that our federal government has gone all in on trying to support this economy, to support workers, and to make moves to keep liquidity in the economy, which is positive in the short term. Long term, we're going to have to see how that pans out. But that has been a continued theme, and would expect it to be a continued theme. And then I think one other key piece is just what's happening on Main Street itself. And this is just something to be aware of. And certainly we're seeing it, ourselves with our own eyes, as well as anecdotally, and just again from talking to our network who touch a lot of these companies directly as well. There are definitely businesses out there that are pivoting. There are businesses out there that are nurturing relationships and getting ready for the other side. There are companies that are gearing up to take customers away from competitors that maybe are not being as responsive right now. And then there's obviously a subset of businesses out there that aren't going to survive this. Certainly some industries have been extremely hard hit. Restaurant business, for example, parts of the aerospace industry. Those companies that aren't going to make it, what opportunity does that create? And where does everybody ultimately position themselves in something of a reconfigured pecking order that's going to occur once the dust settles on everything? So let's switch to now talking about what has been an extremely hot topic, and really what's been the source of a lot of the questions that we've received initially, and a lot of just the constant questions that we're receiving over time, and that is around the different small business relief options. And I've made this comment before. I'm going to say it again. This is incredibly fluid as well. I got a question from one attendee that had made kind of just a general question about the PPP program, and the simple fact of the matter is there's not a general answer. So this is something really to watch. I think there's going to be more guidance, more information that's put out on a lot of fronts. And the simple answer is we don't know. And anybody who tells you they know the answer 100% right now is wrong. It's just that simple. There were some people that thought, for example, they had everything figured out on the PPP program before the application started, and that in of itself changed 2 or 3 times, and it's possible it could get tweaked a little bit again. So it is fluid, something that has to be kept a very, very close eye on over time. Let me dive into some of the specifics, share what we know, and again, we can walk through some questions as well. But first piece, and obviously with the PPP, the Payment Protection Program, I'm sure most everybody knows, if not everybody by now, that the initial allocation of funds went very, very quickly. Now that there are still loans that were in the first pool that just have not funded yet. But basically up to a point, if a company was not approved for funding, the funding was no longer available until what should be as early as Friday, because the Senate yesterday approved an additional $320 billion of funding for that program. The House is expected to vote tomorrow, and from everything I'm hearing from the lending side, those funds should be available, pretty quickly. So for any applications that were stuck because the funding ran out, we expect that queue to loosen back up again. But it has been a very popular program, a very heavily used program. A lot of businesses have taken advantage of it, and as you've probably seen as well, some companies that maybe shouldn't have, some public companies, Harvard University, that are getting some flack, and it looks like you're returning some of those funds. So that's out there. It is a great tool. The forgiveness element, and I want to touch on this for just a second because this is extremely important. The exact rule book on forgiveness is still not clear. What we're advising everybody, and what I will tell you is I think the most prudent approach right now is to just play things somewhat conservatively until we get better guidance on what exactly that forgiveness looks like. Because one thing that is extremely important to the PPP program, this was done through banks, through lenders. And I will tell you, because I think I saw programs through 16 different lenders, I want to say we were involved in one way, shape, or form, and I think north of 30 of these. Each one of them had little tweaks. The application might have been a tiny bit different. The exact calculation was a little bit different. The information was asked for was a little bit different. So I have no reason to believe that forgiveness is not going to be the exact same way. And if a bank made a loan under one set of circumstances, they're going to, again, my guess, they're going to try to line up the forgiveness to match the circumstances of that loan. I do think it's important context just to remember that while we don't have all the answers on how exactly it's going to work, I think there is a general sense that there is going to be a large amount of forgiveness out there available, because banks don't want these sitting on their balance sheets. These loans are earning 1% interest. That's not a lot of money for a bank to be receiving. Banks were paid a fee to close these loans originally. But from everything I've gathered, banks did not want to make these loans unless they had a pretty good sense that they were going to be forgiven on the other end. So as far as forgiveness goes, we don't know. I think it is something to watch very carefully. My understanding is there's going to be some continued guidance that's going to come out on this. And again, once you submit an application for forgiveness, it's up to 60 days after that for that forgiveness to be approved. So what do you do with that short term? It's a question of, keeping very, very good records. I've encouraged people, and advice we've been giving is keep a separate bank account so it's very easy to trace the funds. Make sure if it's gray area, you might want to hold off on using it for that gray area. Focus on the things that payroll costs. You can use it for benefit costs. As long as it's a 75-20-25 ratio, things like rent, utilities, etc. But be a little bit conservative until some of that guidance has come out, because the last thing you want to do is spend all the money and then find out that a portion, for whatever reason, is not forgivable. So that's important. Switching gears then to the EIDL program, and this was another one. This actually came out earlier than the PPP. It also ran out of funds, and it also seemed that the loan amounts were changing a little bit. Now, these are up to $2 million per company. This is a process through the SBA, not lenders directly. And the good news with this program, because it got overwhelmed as well, is that in this new bill that will be passed by the Congress, there's another $60 billion worth of funds for the EIDL program. I'm not aware of any of those that have closed in Arizona. In other states, I believe some of them have funded. Arizona's been a little bit slower. Arizona did not jump on the program, right away. It's still unclear how that process is going to work, what funding amounts are going to be. We heard, even though that $2 million was the max eligible loan, that had been lowered because of fund availability to maybe only $500,000 or less. So that is something to keep an eye on. Probably still a good program, and as long as the funds aren't used for the same thing, a company can have both a disaster loan and a PPP loan. But with that being said, we still don't know a lot at this point. I was sitting here a couple weeks ago and we didn't know a lot then. We still don't know a lot. Now, here's one that I think, and I will tell you today, just with some of the guidance that has come out, is the program to keep a very close eye on, and that's the Main Street Lending Program. We've finally gotten some more guidance on this. It is also through banks. It can operate alongside both the disaster loans and the PPP. The rates are very attractive. What we've seen is somewhere between high twos on a low end into the fours, 4-year terms, and there is a year deferral to that. What originally, when the program guidance came out, it was $1 million loan minimum. There has been a lot of talk over the last handful of days, and I think a lot of feedback that banks have been providing to the Fed, who's administering the program, is that some of the criteria need to be rethought. I even saw something, I want to say Monday, that the loan amount might end up being as low as $500,000 or even $100,000. Now, where that shakes out, we'll have to see, but as soon as there is guidance, that is definitely a program to keep an eye on. That is another opportunity for companies to get access to some funding, because let's be honest, the PPP is only going to cover so far. So if that does prove out to be an attractive program, definitely something to keep a close eye on. And just like the PPP, that is a conversation to have with your banker, because they're going to be the ones that are ultimately funding that. A couple other things I'll just touch on very quickly. There are state-by-state grant and loan programs out there. I'm aware a number of states are doing things. Unfortunately for all of us in Arizona, Arizona is not one of those states yet. There may be some other programs coming out. There was an advanced program under the EIDL, but that has been fraught with some issues. Understanding is that's still out there, but something just to keep an eye on. And on all these things, unfortunately, nothing on this list is 100% crystal clear, tried and true, and not subject to some sort of change. So the best thing we can all do is just continue to pay attention to information that's out there, talk to folks in the know, and as it becomes more clear, take action accordingly. The other thing is, as far as tax options, and I'm not going to cover this in much detail because those options really haven't changed. There's payroll tax credits, there's some deferral options, certainly taking advantage of net operating losses. Some of the rules have loosened up on that. But the best advice is talk to your CPA, because they're going to give you some advice on your individual situation that's going to be really essential. And that's the best course of action you can take. But just be aware that's another area around the relief to small businesses. And it's really, at the end of the day, the right menu of options that makes sense for each company. So let me touch on just briefly, and I think this is really where I want to spend, the meat of the rest of our time here this afternoon, is what to do. And we titled part of this, we survive, now what? And that is certainly a question that a lot of business owners are asking themselves right now. Is the nuclear bomb was dropped. We made it through the initial impact, and now we're trying to figure out how to continue to survive and even get back to a point of thriving. So let's talk about some actionable steps, even in light of the fact that some of these options out there, relief options, et cetera, are still unclear. There are tried and true steps that can be taken starting today. First thing, and cash is king. That's an overused idiom, but cash. Cannot say that enough right now. That is what matters. So really managing based on cash, understanding what's in place, what's earmarked for things down the road, what can be obtained, whether that's maybe freeing up inventory. I mean, a lot of companies right now are exploring options of, how to make some changes so that, liquidating inventory and maybe providing some good sale opportunities, deals with customers. Those kinds of things may make a lot of sense, but again, it's an individualized basis. How do you obtain, handle, and control as much cash as possible? And the really follow on to that is, for companies out there that got the PPP, how to best manage it. And that's extremely important as well. We talked about, with the PPP being very careful, even conservative on the front end, which is something we're certainly advising, and then tracking those funds very, very carefully. Managing that PPP money and knowing, okay, I can use my PPP money for this. It may make sense, for example, right now to, see what you can do in terms of deferring certain payables, but not deferring rent, because rent is in that 25% allowable use, along with utilities and some other expenses. So understanding and just looking at the various buckets that are out there, laying that out, we're big fans of a 13-week rolling cash flow, and really understanding moving parts, the inflows, the outflows. That's going to be the best guide to really making daily and weekly decisions. And quite frankly, that's where most businesses are right now. Get up close, and that's with customers, vendors. I mentioned CPAs, bankers, internal teams. Those are the best things that can be done right now, is really getting in deep with the various stakeholders around the business. What are they telling you? What kind of assurance can you provide them? How much information can you get your hands on? All very, very key. It's going to take a village to get through this, and I think leveraging that entire team, getting close to them. This is also a time when loyalty is going to be bred. Interestingly enough, and I was talking to someone who was a financial advisor earlier this week, and he was actually saying that after the Great Recession, or during that process, he saw some of the best customer loyalty of his career, because he was reaching out to folks at a time when a lot of his competition just had their head in the sand. And again, not to try to sell, but just to be a resource, to answer questions, to be someone to be even a shoulder to cry on at times. We all know what it feels like when our 401ks went to 101ks. I guess now maybe they're back to 201 or maybe 301ks. But really understanding what your team can offer and what you need to do in response to your team, the team around you. Flexibility and talking about the map, and this is again something that's extremely important. Understanding, we're going to talk about a route. We may know that we're going from Phoenix to Las Vegas, for example, but there's different routes to get there. So maybe this is our targeted route, but then understanding based on the bumps that we might find in the road, construction, whatever you have it, we're going to want to know what detours we have available to us. And that skill, that technique has never been more important than right now, because the simple fact of the matter, plans go out the window very quickly when such macro events in our world are changing at the rate they are. If governors come out, and some have already started, where they're starting to reopen their states, that can have a dramatic impact on things. What they decide can open up. If all of a sudden there are further changes, we have other flare-ups with COVID or just other impacts, you have to be prepared. Okay, this route didn't work. We're going to turn right and go over here now at this juncture. That's incredibly important. So knowing the route, knowing the detours, and really managing with that flexibility, and that's thinking in terms of revenue, cash, expenses, operational changes, being able to flex, snapping back, and being able to respond quickly. If you've got the plan laid out, you even think about, I'm always reminded of a lot of golfers, where they actually picture the shot in their mind. It's easier to hit that shot once you've thought through it. So, being able to respond, if all of a sudden things do open up, how do you strike quickly? That's hugely important. The next piece, and I've used this term, and I think certain people are getting tired of me using this term, but melting the snowball. This is extremely important because for the vast majority of businesses out there, and it's important to understand the timing of the snowball, the size of the snowball. There is a snowball accumulating. So if there's been a slowdown in paying vendors, if certain payments, and again, banks and other institutions have been very good and very flexible, and maybe they're allowing payments to be stretched out, that money's all going to have to be paid back at some point. So there is this snowball that is accumulating, and you're pushing it uphill. If not careful, that snowball is going to roll down the hill and kill you. So how do you, even surviving the day, you could die down the road. So how do you proactively melt that snowball? And that really takes two key components. One is understanding and being mindful of the deferral that is building. And what we like to do is even look at that in conjunction with the cash flow forecast. And then also understanding, going back to the map, how do we map out how we're going to potentially attack that snowball so that it doesn't kill us down the road? Certainly seeing that mistake where ignoring that snowball or not realizing the magnitude of that snowball can really come back to haunt things. And then the last piece is, and we know this, I heard a well-known economist talking yesterday that at some point, at least the economic impact of the coronavirus is going to be behind us and will be a distant memory. And that same economist felt that the oil disruption was going to be, much more far-reaching in terms of its impact. But what does that ramp up look like? Again, think in terms of the map. What does it mean to spin back up a supply chain? What does it mean to get the team back? Understanding, okay, if this is the revenue I want to generate, what do I need from the resources internally to be able to generate that revenue? A lot of companies are likely, and they're already talking about it, are certain things outsourced for a period of time or flexed. I had a conversation with a client today about he's thinking about bringing some folks back on part-time. That then ramp up further. But what is that ramp up plan? I've talked about this before. Always, there is tremendous prosperity to be had on the heels of massive disruptions. The greatest wealth creation in the history of the world was right after the Great Depression, or even during it. There will be opportunity. There's going to be opportunity to pick up market share, opportunity to grow, opportunity to flex your business model in a way that you're able to respond stronger. And I'm a firm believer, even just what we've seen from companies from our purview, they're going to come out of this stronger, smarter, and better able to achieve that prosperity. So what does that look like? How do you make sure that you're able to spin up and respond that And it could certainly happen if the governor comes out tomorrow and says, okay, we're back in business on May 15. What does that look like? So that on May 15, you can be ready to go and respond. So I know we went through a lot of things fairly quickly. I tried to address some of the questions up front. I'll cover a couple of the others that I have. And again, encourage any questions that anyone has, go ahead and submit those in the Q&A box. And we'll get through as many as we can, and then we'll certainly tune in next week as we'll have more info and share what we know at that point. So a couple of the questions that have come in, and some of these just related to the PPP specifically. What is covered and what is 100% forgivable? There's a few things we do know that I don't expect to change, and that is one, 75% at least of the costs or the funds have to be used towards payroll. The other 25%, as I said, can be used towards rent, mortgage interest, utilities, etc. But beyond that, we don't have a ton of specific guidance. There's questions around are bonuses eligible to be included in that number? Again, guidance would suggest that bonuses can be as long as they are in the ordinary course of business. Certainly not a time to be giving out discretionary crazy bonuses, but there is some eligibility for bonuses to be paid. Just bearing in mind, again, there's still that cap of $100,000 in annual comp for employees. So for some of the higher comped employees. Business owners. So this is a good question, and this was actually one that there was guidance issued on. Business owners and their compensation can be included in PPP proceeds as it relates to forgiveness. Again, same guidelines, the 100K limitation. And I think really the key there is what the bank is going to look for in terms of any kind of documentation or proof behind that. So, what we've been saying, the easier you can make it, we've worked with clients, if you've got a bank account, that even setting up a schedule so you can literally reconcile and tick and tie every number. This is what this was used for, this is what that was used for, recommending things like having, even check copies, payroll registers, other, bill pay copies, for example, to show exactly where those funds have gone is very key and very important, and certainly a best practice that we would advocate and suggest. Looking at a few of the other questions here. So around reporting on the PPP, and again, the simple answer is we don't 100% know. My expectation is we are going to see lenders start coming out with some guidance. We have to bear in mind, there was a mad rush to get the original PPP funds out. Not all of those have yet funded. So even though the $349 billion has been accounted for, it's not all funded. Now we've got this next wave, and there are certainly a lot of applications that are waiting for that next wave of funding. But it's going to take some time to process through that. And I don't expect we're going to hear a whole lot on definitive forgiveness guidance until the loans are out and funded. And then again, my personal belief is that we are going to see, just like we saw with the funding, that banks are going to evaluate the forgiveness on an individualized basis in line with how they made the loans originally. So probably going to ask for similar information prior and after in terms of evaluating the forgiveness. That is certainly the expectation of what we think we're going to see. But we don't know. Another question that's come up is even the term of mortgage interest, and how is that defined? If you have interest on equipment, can that apply? That's a great question, and that's again why the way that we're advising everybody's approaching it, and I think this is the best I can say is, we can use the information that we have in front of us and make decisions accordingly. That's the best we can do. That's the best we're going to recommend anybody does. So, if effectively you've got 8 weeks of expenses, funding available, how do you manage that? How do you leverage that? How do you use that originally? And simple answer is be conservative out of the gate. Make sure you haven't blown it all quickly. There's certainly situations, and I'm aware of a situation where a company's already used a large portion of it for a questionable use. I would advise against that. I think that's very dangerous, especially until we get guidance, because you have to bear in mind, if this is not forgiven, even though there's a payment deferral for 6 weeks, or for 6 months, I should say, that loan is going to amortize very, very, very quickly. Because you look at whatever that loan amount is over 18 months, that's expensive. Key consultants participate in PPP. So this is another one that has been a tremendous source of gray area. And the answer I'm going to provide here is maybe not the great one, but it's the honest one. I know of multiple banks that have funded 1099 labor. Now, some of that early on, there were some loans that were done very, very early, and I'm talking in the first wave of even applications even being taken. There's been some additional guidance that's been issued. So would those banks do the loan today the same way they did before? That's very much up in question. But I've seen it done, and what that does is really just reiterates the point that it is so bank by bank specific. Talk to your lender, understand their form, and I would generally say it's better to try to push if you think that there's a reasonable business case for something. Now, certainly individual consultants can apply on their own, and I think that's one key distinction. But the broader question on contract labor, we just don't know, and that I think is something that's very important just to continue to follow that very carefully. Just trying to see. So here's one other key question that's come up as well. The rule on the 75-25 with the PPP. Now, certainly for some companies, certain costs may be more than what is allowable. So, it's important, again, to understand in your specific situation to not try and game the numbers too much. And I'll give you a great example of what I mean by this, because we were talking about this the other day in a client situation. There is an element that for a company that cut its workforce by 75%, it's going to be very, very hard to get 100% of that loan to be forgivable, just if you do the simple math, because the program, again, was designed to keep people employed. But it may also not make sense to rehire people and have them idle. So that, again, business by business case, understanding, really understanding what the situation is for that business. And it may be a situation where you say, am I better off amortizing, and not getting that loan fully forgiven to have that capital available, as opposed to rehiring some people a month earlier than I want to? That's a business decision. And I think it's the important thing I'm saying, and I'm not going to sit here and suggest that one way is definitely the way to go over another. It's an important conversation to have. And that's really the biggest thing that I want to leave everybody with today, is the importance of, right now, we need to be asking questions of ourselves, asking questions of our team, asking smart people around us, the banks, the lenders, the CPAs. We are having a lot of conversations right now with our clients on understanding what is best in their case. What does their cash flow look like? And then evaluating situations through that lens, because everything's a trade-off. There's going to be pros and cons to a lot of decisions, but not having that one silver bullet, I just think, is incredibly important to bear in mind. And again, as long as we can continue to gather facts, gather additional information, I think that's ultimately what's going to get us out of here. Because, as I've said before, I have incredible confidence in the American entrepreneur. I've seen that entrepreneur do amazing things. I have no expectation that they're not going to do that. And even just hearing and seeing some of the stories out there of what people are doing, and companies that have shifted to producing masks, to producing protective equipment, to think of more creative ways to supply some of our healthcare workers, for example, or other general consumer. The business owner is going to be just fine out of this. It's going to be a bumpy ride. There's going to be some muscles that are going to hurt, but we're going to come out of this the other side very, very positively. So I think I've addressed most of the questions. I apologize if there's anything I did miss. Go ahead and email me. I know there's a few stragglers that I may not have gotten to, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. This is, as I mentioned, a weekly series, so come back next week. I think we're going to know a lot more about the Main Street Lending Program, and certainly provide additional information as we go. You've got my email there, so feel free to reach out if there's something that I can help answer for you directly. We're here to be a resource. We're trying to help as many companies survive and thrive through this as we can. And I look forward to the other side. So thank you all for joining us today. Appreciate it. Have a good one. Stay strong. Stay safe.